Well, now, pull up a chair. The sun's getting low, and the air's got that cool edge to it that always makes me think of old stories. The name's Earl McKenna. I've spent more of my life on the water than on dry land, and my skin has the road map of wrinkles and sunspots to prove it. I've seen things out on the rivers and the coast that would make a younger man's hair turn white overnight. Most folks these days, they think fishing is about fancy lures and sonar screens. They think it's a hobby. For me, it was never a hobby. It's a language. It's about listening to what the water is trying to tell you. And most of the time, it's whispering a warning. And there's no fishing that makes you listen harder than noodling. Noodling sounds harmless enough, don't it? Like something a child would do on a summer afternoon. But it ain't. It's the oldest kind of fishing there is. It's just you and the river. No rod, no reel, no net. Just your own two hands and a whole lot of nerve you probably shouldn't have. You find a dark, hollowed-out spot under a riverbank or inside a sunken log, a place where a big old channel cat has decided to make its nest. Then you do the last thing any sane person would do. You stick your arm in there, right into the blackness, and you wait. You offer yourself up as bait. The big male, guarding his eggs, he sees your hand as a threat. He'll come at it, mouth wide open, and clamp down. His teeth ain't like a shark's. They're more like a patch of coarse sandpaper made to grip, not to slice. And when he bites, that's your chance. You grab hold of his jaw from the inside, jam your other hand under his gill plate, and you heave. It's a fight. A raw, muddy, underwater brawl. It's more wrestling than it is fishing, my father taught me. He was a man carved from cypress wood and river clay. He'd say, "Earl, you gotta respect the river, but you can't be afraid of it. Fear makes you clumsy, and clumsiness gets you drowned." He taught me how to read the currents, how to spot the bubble trails of a breathing fish, how to tell by the feel of the mud if a hole was empty or occupied. For decades, I practiced, pulled catfish bigger than a man's leg out of holes I couldn't see the back of. Every scrape, every scar on my arms told a story of a good fight, full belly. But as the years piled on, my bones started to creak a little louder than the floorboards on this porch. My wife, Lydia, before she passed, made me promise I'd hang it up. "You're not a young man anymore, Earl," she'd say, patching up another gash on my forearm. There are safer ways to get dinner, and for a long time I listened. I stuck to my boat, my rods and reels. It was easier, safer. The language of the river felt distant, like I was listening to it through a pane of glass. The day it happened, I was feeling that distance more than ever. It was a hot, heavy August afternoon. The air was so thick with humidity, you could wring it out like wet cloth. I was sitting right here on this porch, watching my young neighbor, Thaddeus, wrestling with his fancy new bass boat. The boy meant well, but he was all new-fangled technology and no instinct. He saw me watching and ambled over, wiping grease from his hands. "Afternoon, Mr. McKenna," he said, always respectful. "Thinking of heading out?" I just grunted and nodded toward the river. "Thinking about it. The water's low. The big ones will be holed up defensive." He smiled a little, that polite smile the young give the old when they think they're indulging a bit of harmless rambling. "Well, you be careful. My fish finder showed some real monsters down by the old cypress stand." I bristled at that machine, telling him what my hands had known for 50 years. "A man don't need a machine to find fish, son. He needs to understand the river." That's when the devil of pride dug its heels into me. I hadn't been noodling in almost a decade. But right then, looking at that boy with his clean hands, his electronic gadget, I felt a powerful urge to prove something, maybe to him, but mostly to myself. To prove that the old ways weren't dead. To prove that Earl McKenna wasn't just some relic sitting on a porch waiting for the tide to go out for good. "I'm not just going fishing, Thaddeus," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "I'm going noodling down at the Devil's Den." Thaddeus's smile evaporated. He knew the spot. Everybody did. It was a treacherous bend in the river about 2 miles downstream, a place where the current had gouged out the bank, creating a labyrinth of underwater caves and log jams. It was called the Devil's Den because more than a few people had gone there and never come back. They said the currents were tricky, that you could get your arms stuck, that the snapping turtles in there were the size of truck tires. But the old-timers, my father included, they whispered it was because the catfish in that hole were ancient, unnatural. "Mr. McKenna, you can't be serious," Thaddeus said, his voice laced with genuine concern. "Nobody's gone in there for years. It's not safe. Not for anyone." I knew what he was leaving unsaid. Not for an old man like you. The pride flared hot in my chest. "I was pulling cats out of that hole when your grandfather was still in diapers," I snapped. "I'll be fine. Some things a man's hands don't forget." I ignored the worried look on his face, pushed myself up from my rocking chair, and headed for my old John boat tied up at the dock. The wood of the dock felt solid under my worn boots, a familiar feeling. But for the first time in a long time, as I looked at the dark, slow-moving water, a different feeling crept in, a cold little knot of unease. It was the river, whispering, and for the first time I was too proud to listen. The journey downriver, quiet. The 2-stroke motor on my boat sputtered a familiar, comforting rhythm. The sun beat down, and the cicadas buzzed in a deafening chorus from the trees lining the... It was a scene I'd witnessed 1,000 times, but today it felt different, heavier. As I neared the bend, the landscape changed. The friendly oaks and maples gave way to ancient, gnarled cypress. Their branches hung low, draped in Spanish moss that looked like old men's beards. Their roots, cypress knees, jutted the shallow, crooked brown teeth. The water here was darker, the color of strong tea. Deep stillness settled everything. The air grew cooler. It was always cooler in the den. I cut the engine and let the boat drift the last 100 yards, the silence broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the aluminum hull. The place looked just as I remembered. The bank was a sheer wall of dark earth and tangled roots, undercut by the relentless current. It was riddled with dark openings, gaping mouths, leading into the blackness below the waterline. This was it. This was the place where legends were born and where common sense came to die. I anchored the boat in the shallows, the muddy bottom sucking at the anchor with a sound like a hungry mouth. I took off my shirt, leaving just my overalls. I stood for the water swirling around my ankle, cool and unsafe. The stories came flooding back, not just of big fish, but of strange currents, of things felt in the dark that were never seen. For a heartbeat, Lydia's voice was clear as day in my mind. "It's not worth it, Earl." I shook my head, chasing the ghost of her words away. This wasn't about the fish. This was about me. I took a deep, steadying breath, waded out until the water was up to my waist, and found the hole I was looking for. It was a big one, a dark gash under the roots of a behemoth's tree, its entrance half hidden. A curtain of silt felt alive. I knelt down, the murky water rising to my chest, and plunged my right arm into the cold, waiting dark. The water was colder in the hole. It was a deep, biting cold that felt different from the sun-warmed river, a cold that seemed to rise from the bones of the earth. My arm disappeared up to the shoulder, into the absolute black. I could feel the soft, silty mud giving way around my fingers, the gnarled, texturous root above my wrist. This is the part that separates the men from the boys. It's a test of faith, in a way. You're reaching into a place you can't see, trusting that the only monster in there is the one you're looking for. My father used to say, "The dark is only dark. What you put in it from your own head is what'll kill you." For 50 years I'd believed him, but here, in the Devil's Den, the dark felt different. It felt occupied. It felt like it was watching me back. I moved my fingers slowly, methodically, sweeping the interior. My knuckles brushed against something hard and slick, A rock, maybe? Then something soft and slimy that made my skin crawl. Just river weeds. I forced myself to stay calm, to rely on the instinct that had been honed over. I breathed out slowly, letting the bubbles rise to the surface. Patience, Earl, patience. And then I felt it, a subtle shift in the water pressure deep inside the cavity. A gentle puff of displaced mud against my fingertips. Something was in there, and it was big. A thrill, sharp and electric, shot through me, chasing away the unease. Was it? The old familiar dance. This was the feeling I'd been missing. The pride swelled in my chest again. The old man's still got it. I wiggled my fingers, a deliberate invitation. Come on, old man. A silent challenge to fish. Come and get it. Let's see who's tougher. The response was instant. A powerful surge from the back of the hole. I braced myself, planting my feet firmly in the sucking mud, preparing for the familiar, rasping clampdown. I picture the wide whiskered mouth engulfing my hand, the sandpaper teeth digging in, the furious thrashing as the fight began. Welcome the pain before it even arrived. But the thing that seized my arm in the darkness was not a catfish. The impact was a crushing, blinding explosion of pain. It wasn't the expected sandpaper grip. It was a vice, a solid, heavy pressure that felt like a row of stones grinding into my flesh and bone. The shock was so profound, so alien, that for a full second, my mind refused to process it. My brain was screaming, catfish, but my nerves were screaming something else entirely, something impossible. The shape was wrong. The pressure points were all wrong. It wasn't a wide, flat mouth. It was curved, an arc. And the things grinding into my forearm, they were blunt, wide, smooth on the tops, but with crushing edges. My blood ran ice cold as the horrifying realization flooded every corner of my mind. They felt like teeth, human teeth. A guttural sound of pure terror was ripped from my throat, but it came out as a strangled gurgle lost to the water. Panic, raw and absolute, took hold. This wasn't a fight for a fish. This was a fight for my life. The thing, the mouth, began to pull. It wasn't the frantic, thrashing tug of a panicked animal. It was a slow, deliberate, impossibly strong drag. It was pulling me down into the hole, into the black heart of the river. My feet slipped in the mud. The water, once it was now at my chin. My free hand clawed uselessly at the muddy bank, my fingers finding no purchase. I was being dragged under a creature that shouldn't exist. The pain in my arm was immense, a deep, sickening ache as the pressure intensified, threatening to snap the bone. I could feel the individual teeth, a perfect, spaced-out row of them, locked onto my flesh with the force of a hydraulic press. I twisted my body, trying to use leverage. The creature was an anchor, dragging the world down with it. My head went under. The world became a muffled brown nightmare. My lungs burned for air. I was drowning. In that moment of submerged terror, a primal switch flipped inside me. It was the cornered animal instinct, the sheer, bloody-minded will to live that my father had always talked about. With my last ounce of air, I jammed my left hand against the root above the hole and kicked with all. I wasn't trying to get free anymore. I was trying to break my own arm. I roared into the water, a useless blast of bubbles, and I wrenched my body backward with a violence that tore something deep inside me. For a horrifying second, there was a grinding, tearing sensation. Skin ripped, muscle tore. I felt a sickening slip as my flesh was scraped clean off the bone by that impossible row of teeth. And then I was free. I exploded from the surface, gasping, choking on river water and air. I scrambled backward, a crab walk of pure terror, clawing my way out of the deeper water until I collapsed on the muddy bank, half in and half out of the river. I lay there, heaving, my heart hammering like it was trying to break out of my ribcage. The world spun in a nauseating brown and green blur. For a long moment, I didn't dare look. I was afraid of what I would see or what I wouldn't see. I was afraid my arm would be gone. Finally, trembling, I lifted my right arm. It was there, but it was mangled. Blood was sheeting off it, turning the brown mud around me into a dark, swirling crimson pool. But it wasn't the blood that made me gasp in horror. It was the wound itself, running in a perfect, horrifying curve around my forearm, was the deepest bite mark I had ever seen. It wasn't the chaotic scrape of a catfish or the sharp punctures of a gator. It was a clear, precise, unmistakable pattern, a semicircle of deep, square indentation, spaced just so, the print of a human jaw, but one impossibly large, impossibly powerful. My eyes shot back to the water. The surface, which should have been churning from our struggle, was eerily calm. The ripples were smoothing out, disappearing as if nothing had happened. And then I saw, just below the surface, where the light struggled to penetrate the murky brown, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the bank. It wasn't the long, sleek shadow of a fish. It was broad, thick, a dense, unnatural shape of absolute. It didn't swim or thrash. It simply moved, slow, silent withdrawal, into the deepest, darkest part of the river channel, and then it was gone. The only things left, quiet lapping of the deafening buzz of cicada, bleeding on the bank, staring at a wound that proved I had just hands nightmare. I don't know how long I lay there, shivering in the oppressive August heat, the world a blurry mess of pain and disbelief. Time had lost its meaning. It could have been minutes or an hour. The buzzing of the cicadas had turned into a high-pitched scream in my ears, and the flies were starting to find the blood on my arm. I tried to, but a wave of dizziness sent me crashing back into the mud. I was losing too much blood. My thoughts were thick and slow. Molasses. Human teeth. The words just kept circling in my head, a meaningless, terrifying mantra. I think a part of me was going into shock, the part that keeps you sane by refusing to accept the impossible. That's when I heard the sound of a motor growing louder, and then a voice calling my name. "Mr. McKenna! Earl!" It was Thaddeus. His boat came sliding into the shallow, and he killed the engine. His young face a mass of worry. He saw me, and the color drained from. He saw the blood. "Oh, my God!" he breathed, jumping out of the boat into the knee-deep water and scrambling up the bank toward me. "What happened? Did a gator get you? A snapper?" He knelt beside me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pity. He reached for a clean rag from his back to wrap my arm, but then he froze. His gaze was locked on the wound. I watched his expression shift from concern to utter confusion. He traced the shape of the bite in the air with his finger, his mouth slightly agape. What in God's name did that?" I tried to answer. My voice was a dry, cracking whisper. "It wasn't an animal, son," I managed to croak out. "It had teeth, like a man." Thaddeus just stared at me. The look on his face was worse than disbelief. It was the look you give a beloved grandparent who has started to lose their grip on reality. "Okay, Mr. McKenna," he said, his voice soft and placating like he was talking to a scared child. "Okay, let's just get you back. We need to get this cleaned up." He helped me to my feet, and the world tilted violently. I leaned on him heavily as he guided me to his boat, never once mentioning my words again. The ride back was a blur of engine noise and the throbbing, searing pain in my arm. He was quiet, and I was lost in the memory of that crushing, that slow, deliberate pull into the dark. The town doctor, Solomon Pike, was a good man, but a man of science and logic. He cleaned the wound thoroughly, stitched up the deepest gashes, and wrapped my arm in clean white bandages. He listened patiently as I, shaking and pale, told him what I'd felt. The pressure, it was like a row of molars, not sharp, crushing. He just nodded, his face impassive. "Earl," he said gently when I was done, "you lost a lot of blood. The body does strange things when it's in shock. The mind can fill in gaps with our worst fears. From the look of these lacerations and the deep tissue bruising, I'd say you had a run-in with the biggest, meanest snapping turtle in this county. Their beaks don't have teeth, but the edges are serrated, and the force of their bite is a shattered bone. You're lucky you still have your arm. He patted. Go home, rest, take these for the pain, and maybe leave the noodling to the younger fellas. No one, not a soul. Thaddeus told people I'd been clipped by a submerged log, a story we both knew was a lie, but was easier for him to tell and for others to hear. The folks in town would see me, their eyes full of sympathy. Heard you had a nasty accident, Earl, they'd say. They saw me as a poor old man who'd had a scare, a man whose mind was getting as worn and frayed as his fishing nets. My own story became my prison. The more I insisted on the truth, the crazier I sounded. The river, my oldest friend, become my tormentor. I'd look out at it from my porch, and I no longer saw the promise of a good catch. I saw a dark, unknowable thing, a liquid graveyard that held secrets it had no intention of giving up. Weeks turned into months. The wound healed, but the scar remained, a pale, ghastly arc on my forearm that was a perfect mirror, a human jaw. I couldn't let it go. I spent my days in the town's small library, digging through dusty archives, reading century-old newspapers until my eyes burned. I was looking for anything: drownings, strange disappearances, folklore about the devil's den. I found plenty of accidents, but nothing that explained what had grabbed me. My obsession was pushing me further away from everyone. I was the crazy old fisherman with his tall tale. One afternoon, I was talking to Jonah, who ran the bait shop, and mentioned my search. He just shook his head, but then he paused. You know, he said, if anyone knows the river's ghost stories, it's Judith, old Judith Miles. Lives up on the ridge. She's older than the cypress trees themselves. I found her little cabin tucked away in the woods, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Judith was a tiny woman, her face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles, her eyes a startlingly pale blue. She listened to my story without interruption, her hands busy knitting something in her lap. When I was finished, the room was silent, save for the clicking of her needles. She looked from my face to the scar on my arm, which I held out for her to see. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded, as if I had just described common-type cloud. You were a fool to go there, Earl McKenna, she said, her voice dry as autumn leaves. Some places belong to the water. The den, that place belongs to him. Him? I asked, my heart pounding. They called him the Bottom Walker, she said, her eyes looking past me into a memory a century old. He wasn't always a thing. He was a man a long time ago, a river logger, mean and solitary. They say he got caught in a log jam right in that spot, was dragged down and pinned to the bottom. They never found the body. The river kept him. She paused, her needles stopping for the first time. They say he's still down there, still pinned, and he's angry. Angry at the water that holds him, angry at the living who move freely above him. He can't leave, so he grabs, he pulls, he wants company in his cold, muddy grave. I sat there, frozen. It was a ghost story, a piece of folklore. It made no logical sense, but what had happened to me also made no logic. The crushing grip, the slow downward pull, the feel of those teeth. It wasn't an animal. It was a will. It was hatred. The old ones knew, Judith continued, resuming her knitting. They knew to leave that bend in the river alone, to give the river's grief its space. Your father knew. That's why he never took you noodling in the den, did he? And she was right. He never had. I left Judith's cabin with a strange sense of peace. I finally had an answer, even if it was one I could never share with anyone else. I had my truth. It's been 15 years since that day. I still live in this house. I still sit on this porch and watch the river go by. But I never go on it anymore. Thaddeus takes me out in his fancy boat sometimes, but I don't fish. I just watch. My hand, the one the creature grabbed, aches when the weather turns cold, a deep, bony ache that reminds me of the crushing pressure. Sometimes, at night, when the house is quiet, I run my thumb over the scar. It's smooth now and pale, a perfect crescent of faint square mark. It's a reminder, a lesson branded into my flesh. The world is full of old, deep, and hungry things, and our pride is a flimsy shield against them. I went to the river that day to prove I was still its master. I came back knowing I had never even been its guest. I was just a trespasser, and I was lucky to leave with my life. Some holes are best left unexplored, some mysteries are best left at the bottom of the river, and some mouths were never meant to be found by the hands of men. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel for more tales from old Earl McKenna. Your subscription is the tide that keeps this boat afloat.